Good morning, everybody. We're just trying to get our heads around what's in front of us here, and so we're recalling what we're trying to summarise what took place yesterday in the workshops, which is an almost impossible task because we were present at 2. All right, and there weren't, and I think in some cases it was the same workshop. In that case, we depended on the reports that the rapporteurs sent us or placed on the platform. So the 6 themes you know already, and we're going to mention some of the takeaways from yesterday. And again, as in any conference, particularly in the field of guidance, we're always talking about changing and improving, okay? And I thought that Benjamin Franklin's quote was quite apt. So we're not finished. The themes I'm going to talk about are integrated lifelong support, the professionalization of practitioners, and the third one, which is evidence and accountability. So one of the things that people mentioned was the fragility of the national fora for guidance that were established particularly in the years maybe 2004, 2009, and other related structures in other countries. And just to say that, I mean, we had the Council resolution which strongly recommended having these national coordination entities. We had guidelines for them produced by CEDAFOP, but it's almost as we have let the child run wild. All right, we've started something, but we haven't really taken care to continue to support and to monitor, and that's really what I think was the call that was coming from this particular workshop. And again, just to keep in mind the reasons why we're doing this, and the reasons are that not all EU citizens have access to services. I mean, the Eurobarometer survey that was quoted by Alison yesterday it's a very clear statement that significant proportions of the population do not have access in each country to services, and the end game of the fora, of the national fora, the end game is in fact to widen access, and we have to keep that in mind, all right? And so that is something that needs to be continued to be supported. The second topic is the competence of practitioners, and I chose this image because I think if I was in a practitioner situation now, I think I'd find there are things happening all around me that I have no control about. There are people talking about policies, there are technological changes, there are social media, and I've never been trained for any of this. So where do I stand? And if you look on the image there, you could be standing anywhere, and all of a sudden you're supposed to be somewhere else, or somewhere else, or somewhere else. So, and you're supposed to have this competence and that competence. And so we have to give a thought to what should be priorities in the context of the changing world that we're in. And it's quite clear that competence in ICT, social media, and outreach are things that should be part and parcel of initial and continuing training, and I think that's that training programs that don't provide this for practitioners do an injustice really to the practitioners themselves. And I think part of that again could be assisted by more stakeholder involvement in the design and evaluation of training, and by again, training the trainers, because they need to be brought into the 21st century, all right? Because they have responsibility for the training courses as it currently stands. But I don't think that the content and methodology of training should entirely depend on the people who provide the training. I think there needs to be broader consultation. And I mentioned earlier that one of the competences was around ICT, media, and approaches. I forgot to mention LMI, right? Because everybody is heading towards the labour market, either to employment, underemployment. All right, I think you mentioned these later, and the fact is that. Sometimes one gets the impression from the initial training programs that the labour market is something that you learn about after you leave the training, right? Whereas in fact it should be a central focus. So again, there was a call for that to be re-emphasised in training. The last workshop that I'll talk about is that on evidence and accountability. And here we're looking at the blessings of accountability. So you can, as we say in English, right, you can count your blessings, right? I thought that's very appropriate for this particular theme. I'm actually, I was thinking this morning on the way here about the recommendations of the European Commission in 1966 on career guidance, and the recommendations of the European Parliament in 1966. Now, there's no way that any of us here, including myself, all right, were present at the time, okay? Even though I might look as if I was, but the truth is, these recommendations mentioned the need for annual reporting, and they also mentioned the need for data collection. And these were recommendations to the member states of the time. Maybe that kind of recommendation needs to be expanded to the existing member states and not the original 6, as happened back in 1966. So one of the suggestions coming from the workshop was the need for a mapping exercise to find out what actually is being done at the moment, because we find ourselves in a 2-track Europe, or maybe a 3-track Europe. Some countries like Belgium, the Flanders, where it's very clear that they have that they're managing this well and have been developing over the last few years in the education sector. There are other countries, of course, where the public employment services have been recording what they do, because they're required administratively to do so. So we do have some examples in that way. So that's the first track. The second track are like the examples we had from Jennifer McKeown from Ireland, of what they have been doing over the last 2 or 3 years, which is, it's a work in progress. And then there's a big black hole after that, where there's a lot of countries haven't even started, all right? And so, like, we can't continue in this way, given that, again, if you go back as far as 1966, or go back to 1999, or go back to 2003 to the OECD report, I mean, we can't keep going forever and saying, well, we're not aware of this, and we're not going to do, we're not aware of this, so we're not doing anything about it. I mean, it's a reality. We need evidence-based policies, and we need to collect basic data. And so, to that extent, one of the recommendations from the workshop was that we would, that at a European level, guidelines would be developed on what types of data should be collected, and again, what kind of impact is intended by these. And the final point was really a point made from the Ireland experience, but it also applies to, I think, to all countries, that there has to be sensitivity to the different stakeholders involved. and that it's not a process that can be introduced overnight.
Okay, so we have 3 more topics to go. It's going to be B, C, and F, and then which means that workshop B was about access, providing access for different vulnerable groups, which is obviously was one of the priority of the 2008 resolution. And here we just try to highlight a few items which might have some additional or new messages comparing those messages we have been discussing in the last couple of years. One point was very interesting, that as 40% of the European labor force now just temporarily employed, so they either have a closed, ended contract, or they just have been contracted through temporary work agencies. The temporary work agencies work, which is basically regulated at the national level, but also has something to do with European level, should be the work should be added in the field of guidance, so providing some type of career management skills for those temporary workers who need to do their careering, so moving from one job to another, because this is what the market dictating to them. The second point was, I think it's just a strong reminder whenever we are talking about the practice of career guidance or lifelong guidance. This is something we have to bear in mind, the pedagogical background of guidance. So not forget about this strong fear that this is not only the business of psychologists, but we have economists, social politicians, and so on and so on. So it must be joint work. And the last point was the deeper involvement of the HR department of different companies. So what can they bring into the practice of career guidance at the daily level, as they should know what is actually happening within the companies. So this bridge should be more active between the companies and the guidance professionals. Then I'm moving to section C, which was about labor market or functioning labor market. I even love the title, because if somebody could tell me what the functioning labor market is, I would be very grateful for that. Okay, we have the key targets at the European level, which means that 75% of the prime age workforce should be employed by 2020. But there are obviously differences by countries. Thanks God, the economic climate is very strong at the moment in Europe. But obviously it could change anytime. So few points here were also raised. First of all, it was very strongly echoed also in the Swedish presentation, but coming from the CEDEFOP skills panorama, that people need to be teach so how to use labor market intelligence. And here, not labor market information, but labor market intelligence was highlighted, which means also some type of activities on the side of the guidance community. So bringing all of these pieces of information together and providing easy to use, easy to understand, and also validated information and intelligence to the users, not only for the citizens, all citizens, if guidance is inclusive, that we have to provide labor market intelligence to everybody, not only for long-term unemployed or vulnerable, different vulnerable groups, but also in the company side, we always forget about the very weak position of the small and medium enterprises in Europe, who are indeed the biggest employer. But their position on gathering labor market information and intelligence and also interface with guidance actually very weak. So we have to also work with the employers. Then that was also a theme of the conference, how to set up a virtual one-stop shop for labor market intelligence. So now people are being forced in different countries to visit different websites. And in one country, the Ministry of Labor or the Public Employment Service is very happy with the new website development, and then the Ministry of Education is doing something else. So, I mean, you can't force European citizens to flip-flopping around different websites and telling them that this is your own responsibility to go through all of these websites and find out what's the reality when you have contradiction in information. And sometimes you even don't know that the information, what the website is providing you, was it validated by the government? Is it an official data? Is it up-to-date data, or just somebody put it there, like a private company 10 years ago, and thanks to Google it's still alive? Okay, so then just Googling information doesn't necessarily mean that you really have updated and validated information. Then it must be the responsibility of the states, and must be some responsibility on the guidance community side. We also mentioned the skill forecast issue. I think it's very challenging, especially because we are using this word in English. But the reality is that what we are still doing is, many countries, is like prognosis of different occupations. So really making distinction between occupations and skills. And for just to highlight this is what I find from the literature. It's coming from the OECD, but the research was done actually in Canada, which is still not yet a member of the European Union. And here what we can see that there are, in this skill triangle, there are 3 different levels. There are basic skills, and then there are no doubt about that basic skills must be delivered by public education around the European member states. This is something what we cannot debate, but that it also means that these basic skills provide you portability. So when you have to move from one job to another, then the basic skills like mathematics, literature, and so on, this is what we all need to build on. Then the second level, we have the workplace-based skills or vocational skills, which are still portable. But look at the top of the pyramid, which are basically the non-portable skills. So these are connected with certain companies. We have to bear in mind that when we are talking about skills which fits just to needs of certain companies, what's the role of the state to providing this, and then what's the role of certain companies to keeping those skills alive, which can be used only in their workplaces. And I think it also has something to do with the guidance policy and guidance practice. And finally, we had the innovative practices workshop and peer learning, which is obviously an evergreen topic. And here, a couple of items just to highlight. One was about the setting up common platforms for peer learning, not at the European level, because at the European level we already have a lot of these. For example, Euroguidance is doing this. EIGPN database is still alive. The database of the Public Employment Service is alive, and so on and so on. I'm not listing. There are hundreds of good practices or websites which are gathering good practices. But what was mentioned, and most probably it's a weak point of all of us, that these good practices are not really gathered, analyzed at the member state level or regional level or district level. So the cooperation between guidance professionals and the other professionals at the national level, regional and local level should be improved. The second bullet point is very much connected with this. So make these good practices accessible, obviously online nowadays, and then setting up a discussion mechanism to keep career information updated. This is obviously one of the core business of guidance professionals, and we are selling our work as saying that we are the one who are keeping the gates and know what information is valid in the labor market, what is not, including information about the education system. But are we absolutely sure that whatever we are telling to the client face-to-face or online, those information are really updated and really valid in the country or in the district where we are working currently? So these are the key points, and then I have 2 more slides. This is what I find in the archive of the ILO, because the title of the conference somehow linked with ICT, with digitalization. So what is actually happening currently in the European labor market and where all of these changes are going forward. Obviously, we don't know exactly, but the calculation behind shows us that how strongly our European member states are affected or will be affected by the digitalization of the labor market. And when you see countries in red, it means that they will be highly affected by these changes. So it means that jobs going to disappear very soon. New jobs will be created, obviously, which means, thanks God, that it's created a lot of jobs for guidance professionals. That's the good news. And the very last slide here. This is coming from you. So as you can see, thank for all of you who voted online. We had 66 answers. And by the sixth topic, what we asked for yesterday, these are the main answers. I'm not going to read this because my screen is too small, yours is big, so you can read it yourself. Thank you very much.